All right, coming to you live from the greatest neighborhood in Houston, Texas, broadcasting out to an adequate suburb of Houston, Texas. This is AP Euro Unit 5 review. We're going to be moving on to Unit 5 in the course description, so let's just take a look at it and see what exactly we're going to be talking about here. So we see Unit 5 is titled Conflict, Crisis, and Reaction in the Late 18th Century. Mostly it's going to be about the French Revolution and Napoleon. We'll get to that on Monday. Today we're going to look at just general conflict and the rise of Great Britain as the most powerful of the European nation states. All right, so this is the very tail end of the 1648 to 1815 time period. It's the last one we'll do there. So just to break down what we've covered so far, Units 1 and 2, they dealt with the first time period, 1450 to 1648, the Renaissance, the Age of Exploration, the Commercial Revolution, the Protestant Reformation, and then just sort of daily life. And then we looked at Unit 3 and 4. Unit 3 dealt mostly with the political government, the rise of absolutism. And then Unit 4 dealt with the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, and more daily life, what life was like in the 1700s in particular. So Unit 5 is going to look at the very tail end of this time period, basically from 1789 to 1815. Those are two important dates you'll need to know. 1789 is the start of the French Revolution. 1815 is the Congress of Vienna and our end of this time period. Okay, so let's take a look at the two topics we're going to talk about today, the rise of global markets and Britain's ascendancy. This is going to be really easy. This video will be really short, as you will see, because we've talked about these things already. These are kind of a continuation of features that we have seen previously, as you will hopefully notice. All right, so 5.2, the rise of global markets. We talked about this. This begins with Europeans seeking out greater trading opportunities, the age of exploration, the establishment of mercantile colonies in the New World, the establishment of port cities where trade's conducted in Africa and the Indian Ocean. It's only going to become a bigger and bigger part of the European economy. The thing that pops into my mind when I saw this topic was the increasing presence of capitalism, which I'm not sure if I've mentioned this, is the greatest economic system ever created. The increasing presence of capitalism and the effects it has on all aspects of European life, right? And so the big idea that we're going to talk about today for this particular topic is that the increase in European commercial activity is going to lead to greater world connectivity. I guess I put it in my notes as like, it's going to speed up the growth of the World Trade Network. All right, so what are the causes and effects of maritime competition from 1648 to 1815? And really what we're going to look at here is rivalry, war, and conflict that comes about because of this increased economic competition that we are seeing, right? So as Europeans become a more commercial society, they are going to be more involved in the World Trade Network, and that's going to lead to rivalry and sometimes conflict, okay? So the commercial and economic rivalry is going to lead to sometimes conflict, sometimes outright war, and there are two really good examples I can think of that are not mentioned at this point in the course description, and that's the War of Jenkins' Ears. Jenkins was, well, it's interesting, what is he exactly? He would claim that, he is a European or an English merchant. The Spanish would call him a smuggler. He was caught trying to sell goods into Spanish colonies, and he loses his ear. He goes home, he rabble-rouses about it, and it leads to conflict between the English and the Spanish. All right, the 7 Years' War is also an example of conflict. We're going to talk about this in greater detail a little bit later, but that's another good example. There is what Kagan calls basically a new Part 2 100 Years' War that takes place between the British and the French. We'll take a look at that rivalry when we talk about the 7 Years' War. And then just the aspect of smuggling that are going on where people are trying to bring in goods to colonies that are not part of their mother country, and piracy is going to be a big part of this as well. Sir Francis Drake is a very famous English privateer, which means he is a pirate, but he works for the state or for a state, as opposed to just going into business for himself like a Jack Sparrow or anything like that would be. All right, so intense competition in the Atlantic, particularly in the Caribbean. Spanish silver is going to be shipped back to Spain from their New World colonies. That will attract much of the pirate activity that is going on. And there's just a constant sort of jostling for control and adding new colonies or taking colonies away from other people that we will see in the Atlantic world, with England and France in particular waging that new 100 Years' War. So the main idea that we're talking about here is that economic rivalry leads to political conflict, right? We see it in the Atlantic, but it's not only in the Atlantic, it's also in the Indian Ocean. And we have mentioned this earlier. Portugal was the first to make their way into the Indian Ocean. They make contact with India first. They make contact with the East Indies first, but they will not be the dominant European power there. And the reason for that is they will be muscled out of their territory. And during this time, towards the end of the 1700s, what we see is two really dominant European powers emerge in the Indian Ocean. And that is going to be the British, who have control of India, and the Dutch, who have control of the East Indies and the spice trade. And they will grow very wealthy from that. And so the big losers here are going to be the Portuguese, who are muscled out of their East India territory by the Dutch, and the French, who, as part of the agreement at the end of the 7 Years' War, gives up all territorial claims in India. All right, and so that's it for this particular topic. I told you it would be quick. 5.2, the rise of global markets, the global trade network, the global network, whatever you want to call it, leads to increased political conflict. We see it in the New World. We see it in the Indian Ocean. It's everywhere. Okay, so let's move on. Second topic we're going to talk about today is the rise of Great Britain as a truly global power that takes place during this time as well. So the big picture idea here is that the economic and political consequences of Britain and France's rivalry. And when I say big picture, really that's what you should focus on when you're studying this stuff. What are the effects, the political and economic consequences of Britain and France's nearly 100 years of conflict that happened in the 18th century? All right, so number one, the thing they want to talk about first is that there is basically a lot of wars being fought between the British and the French, and a lot of it takes place in their colonial territory. The best example of this, the aforementioned 7 Years' War, otherwise known as the French and Indian War, if you are a fan of American history. The 7 Years' War is going to tie into a lot of the events we've talked about. It's a rivalry over access to colonies and trade and wealth and things like that. Fighting will take place in not only North America, but also in the Caribbean and in the Indian Ocean, where there's some jostling going on around India. And it ties into what we talked about in, I think it was Unit 4, Austria and Prussia become the two most powerful German states. Their rivalry over Silesia is going to get kind of coalesced into this event, as well as the British will make an alliance with Prussia, and the French will align with Austria. I think I have those alliances right. All right, so it is a global event, which shows the global power that the European nations are capable of projecting at this time. The British are ultimately going to be successful, and they are going to get French Canada. They are going to get the French out of India. Really, the French, the only thing that they get out of this is that they are allowed to keep their Caribbean colony, particularly Saint-Domingue, which we will talk about during the French Revolution, because it's going to be a part of that event as well. Now, another example of competition between the French and the British during this time is the American Revolution. The French are going to come to the aid of the Americans under the idea that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and this is going to play a role in the coming French Revolution that we're going to talk about on Monday as well. But the French are going to see an opportunity to harm the British, and so they will jump on that. Now, because of Britain's success in most of these wars and conflicts, Britain is going to become the preeminent European power during this time. And Britain has gone under some really big changes in this time period. They are one of the key players that you should know about from 1648 to 1815. So basically, what we see is that the British at the beginning of this time period are having religious and political problems, right? The fallout from Henry VIII's creation of the Anglican Church, and then the emergence of Puritan resistance to that, as well as a fight between the King and Parliament over the role of Parliament and what exactly the King of England is and is not, is going to result in the English Civil War, which eventually results in the Glorious Revolution and the creation of the English Bill of Rights of 1689 and the Act of Supremacy, one of the two, that is really going to transform England into a limited constitutional monarchy with relative religious tolerance for at least Christian minority groups, as long as you're not Catholic and then Jews, they're going to be treated badly still. And protection of private property, the basic ideas of individual rights that will shape Western society going forward are first incorporated into England, right? And so England, after the Glorious Revolution, becomes a stable, prosperous country with a limited government, with relative civil liberties for its citizens and great economic prosperity. Now, of course, some historians are going to credit this economic prosperity to their political stability. The protection of private property incentivizes people who possess capital to invest that capital, knowing that they will be able to enjoy the fruits of their labor, that their property and capital won't be taxed or unfairly seized by the state. Opens up all sorts of opportunities for business and economic prosperity, right? And so that is kind of the big thing that we see. And this ties in with 3.2. If you go back and look at that in the course description, that was about the political movements that are happening in England. So England during this time becomes very political stable, a limited constitutional monarchy with civil liberties, and quite prosperous economically, because they are going to be the winners in the conflicts that take place between them and mostly the French, but also the Spanish, which is going to allow Britain to become the British Empire in the next century, in the 1900s, as we will talk about. But that's it for today. Hopefully I kept this pretty short. I will have a new DBQ for you guys. I will email out on Monday. Until then, I'll see you on Monday when we talk about the French Revolution, which I have lots of notes. So be excited or dread it. I don't know which way it's going to go. Talk to you guys later.